So today I have kind of two projects for you, but they're along the same lines of resist painting. So this one is one that's done with, I did it either with crayon or oil pastel, either one will work. And then this one is done with just a white glue. Both of these are. So just a glue, and you can see where we did the glue outlines and then went over it with the paint. So the paint is resistant to that, and it just creates these really cool effects. Kids love this, especially this one, because once you paint over it with the paint and your lines come out, it's like magic. It's just fun. So this is a great opportunity to talk to kids about the materials as well. So you can explain that an oil pastel or a wax crayon, what the materials are made out of and why they would resist the watercolor. The same thing with the glue, like kind of talk about the science behind it a little bit and get their wheels turning with, you know, what the different materials will do, how they will work, how they might not work, depending on what they're trying to do. So let's jump into it. I'm going to show you guys how to do this with your kiddos and have a little bit of fun. So for this particular project, because we're going to be using watercolor for the backgrounds, you're going to want a pretty sturdy piece of paper. This one is definitely a watercolor paper. This one actually I think might have just been either sulfite or some kind of drawing paper. And same thing with this one. I'm pretty sure this one is the sulfite paper. We used a lot of this. I mentioned it in my last video because it's not, you know, the highest quality of paper, but it does hold up to the paint and the water, which is great for kids to just kind of play and experiment and so on. But this is a sturdy piece of paper. I think this is a piece of watercolor paper I snagged from my kid real quick. And I've done a little line down the middle just so we can talk about these two different forms of resist and how we're going to show kiddos how to do this and what works well. So as you can see in this one, I believe I did this for a winter camp, which was all age groups, which can be tricky sometimes when you're planning that. So snowflakes are always a good popular choice, right? And if you're doing something like this, obviously for the younger kids, like kindergarten, first grade, just very simple shapes, draw the shapes on a board or a piece of paper to give them an example. Older kids, older elementary kids, they can start getting more intricate with their designs. They can try to do a more detailed scene as well. But what I find for this is the more basic the shapes, the better, or even if they just want to go absolutely abstract and doodle, because you can see, let's see, what are we going to draw today? Let's just do some flowers because they're fun. Well, there's a little bit of guck on that. Let me clean that off a little bit. You can see the oil pastel on the paper, right? But some of the kids might get a little frustrated depending on the lighting or depending on their comfort levels, but you can see it on the paper pretty well. So I wouldn't worry about outlining for this particular project because they'll be able to see it. Now, older kids, again, they might want to get a little more exact and specific, but just explain that if they do a pencil line first, that pencil line is going to show up underneath this and you lose a little bit of that magic, right? So let's do a little bit of grass, just a little bit of fun. So again, when I'm teaching kids, I say again because I mentioned this in the last video, but in case you didn't see the last video, when I'm teaching kids, I always offer just a very, I want to say like limited or general sort of rules because I really want them to just have fun and explore and feel free with their artwork. So for something like this, I might say, again, make sure you're filling most of your space. For the resist, especially because we're using either a crayon or an oil pastels tend to work a bit better than the crayons, but you can get like a sharper point on a crayon. Whatever you have handy is fine. But I would say, you know, don't get too detailed with this. I would leave it bigger spaces because if you try to do little tiny details, it's going to start to blur together. But again, that's something that they can just kind of figure out and learn for themselves as well. But my general rules for this would be fill a good part of your paper. Don't leave the paper, like we're not just going to draw a big circle and call it a day, right? Because that's not very much fun. I always tell kids to challenge themselves and do their best in that way to try to push themselves a little bit and really use their creativity. Kind of the idea being like, don't sell yourself short. Don't be afraid to make mistakes by any means, because mistakes are how we learn. So with the oil pastel side, one thing that's great about this project is you can do this part of it and then go straight into the watercolor. You don't have to worry about letting anything dry. So let's go ahead and do that. So a couple of tips when we're dealing with kids and watercolor palettes, or any other palettes really, but watercolor, because they always come in little trays. You know, we don't want the paint mixed up. I got a little sloppy here, so bad example, but it is what it is. So tell them, dip the water into the, or dip the brush into the paint, into the water. I'm going to get it right. Dip the brush into the water and then dip it into the paint, right? And then paint with that color. And then when you're done with that color, dip it back in the water before you go into the next color that you're using. So let's be real. Like, obviously, even I struggle with that. Okay. And then sometimes things spill, just like they did here. It's a very tiny palette, but you know, don't put too much pressure on them. I will put a link below, an Amazon affiliate link, to the paint palettes that we used in the nonprofit. They're just the nice long palettes with the little round tubs and several colors in there for the kids to use. And that way, if you have kids at home, siblings, or if cousins are getting together, they can each have their own palette. It's great if you are doing a camp or a group event. Just give each kid their palette. They're not very expensive. That way they're responsible for their own palette and they can't blame anybody else. Nobody's screaming about somebody mixing the colors together, and that is a good thing. All right, so all we do then is kind of look at where our pastels are and then just start painting in, right? Just start painting it in. Now the cool thing is, let's get you a little closer, is that when you go over the wax, it resists, obviously, right? So we're going to do a little rays of sunshine here around our wax, our waxy bits. And so if it's the first time your kids are doing this, they're going to really love that. It's a fun little trick. It's something different. It's something interesting. We can talk about how kind of the wax, the oils in the oil pastel, the wax in the crayon, how they push the water and repel the water away, such things, right? And it's an interesting way for kids to start learning about what their materials are made of and what their materials will do, right? So let's get into our little flower here. And it just creates this really pretty outline. And there's not a lot of pressure, right? Because the marks are thick enough that if they're really concerned about staying inside the lines, they're not too stressed out because they have plenty of room to play. You can tell I'm not trying to be super neat and super accurate about it, but it's just going to repel that. Oh, I'm shaking my camera and getting too into it, I guess, right? So, and just kind of let them experiment with how they want that to look. So obviously the flower stem, I'm just going to go around the flower stem because I can't color in the flower stem itself. So if they're not sure about that, they can just go around certain lines and it'll still give kind of the same effect. So again, it's not something that has to be extremely accurate, which is nice. So this is great for younger kids because they don't have quite as much control over their materials yet. So this is just kind of a fun thing for them to get a really lovely little project. And again, for the older kids, like once you show them the demo and they see how it's done, their wheels are going to start turning and they're going to start thinking about what they can do. Let's get you in the picture. What they can do with this and how they can be creative with it, and just let them run with it, right? Let them figure it out. And with the watercolors, the nice thing about watercolors too, speaking of learning about your materials, right? So let's get into some of this yellow. We'll put some yellow down here. And this is another way for kids to learn color mixing as well. So I'm going to clean up my brush, dupe it on my towel, and then go into my blue. And then when I go into my yellow, I'm getting this whole different kind of green. So this is just a really great way for kids to play around, start experimenting with color mixing with the different materials. And now all of these bits, once it's dry, you can just wipe them off of the wax, and we're gonna let it dry. So as I was going along here, I realized I was using very traditional colors, green grass, blue background, blah, blah, blah. I would encourage the kids to be very playful with the colors, be as abstract as they want to, and just use whatever the colors they want to play with. So now with some of these bits where you can see that it's really beaded up, you can actually just go in with a paper towel or a towel, kind of doop, 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 boop, 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 and make the sound effects while you're at it, obviously, because otherwise it just doesn't work as well. And just kind of clean some of those places up. Right, kind of get those little beaded bits off if you really want to. I think they add a nice little texture. So you just have like the basic idea of how to create that resist effect with crayon or with an oil pastel and a watercolor. Now, one way to take this a step further, and I would do this, you know, maybe 3rd through 5th graders, is to then go in, you know, once you have your shapes created, your image created, and go in with just a fine line pen to outline certain shapes to add a little more definition. And go around maybe those wax parts, and same thing with the glue side. So let's go into the glue side and I'll tell you how that works. So the glue side of this is going to take a little more planning because obviously the glue is going to have to dry before you're able to go in with the paint. So this is another one of those projects that I like because it can be a nice step-by-step kind of project. So with this one, you could outline your design first. So if you have, like for this one, for example, and the flowers, I did go in and do an outline design first. It will show a little bit under the glue, but it's not a huge problem. And this is a good time to teach the older kids, especially, how to start making really light pencil marks so that they're not always pushing down so hard, because they're really taught to push down, make it clear in school so that it can be read easily. And so it's kind of counterintuitive for them to go very lightly with their pencil marks, but we're just going to do a simple flower shape again, just for simplicity today. So if they can go in a little bit lighter with their circles, you'll get a lot of this fuzzy line kind of stuff. It is okay. Just let them do what they're comfortable with, but get them to start thinking a little bit lighter with the pencil instead of, like, you know, really pushing down as they're taught to in school. Because of course, when we want to erase, this is what I always explain, if you want to erase, that really dark line is going to be a lot harder to erase than a really light line in case you want to go and change something later. So that's just another little added bit of lesson that you could throw into this project. So we're going to make some big, loose, trying not to put my hand on the wet part of this. It's looking a little sloppy. And we're just going to do another little wobbly flower. All right, so now with this, with the glue, I would say don't go in and do really, really detailed sort of things, because the glue is obviously going to spread out. And I'm just using just a washable, regular liquid glue. So some of them, again, you can go in and just add little dots, add little whatever you want to add, maybe some little squiggles, just to add some extra things. And if you wanted to do something completely abstract, this is a really good, just kind of a playful thing to do as well. But when we're outlining our flower, let's turn it this way a little bit. So we're going to just go around and outline our shapes. So one thing I tell the kids is be careful. We're not, you know, I'm going to close this up for a second. We're not squeezing like this, right? We're not double fisting squeezing it, because you're going to end up with a big puddle of glue. And you want to just very slowly, very gently move it around your shapes. And this is where larger shapes are important. So if they wanted to add some more detailed things, I would say add the details, but maybe don't fill those tiny little details in with glue, because what will happen is obviously if you try to add a little bitty detail somewhere with the glue, once the glue starts to sit on the paper, it's going to start spreading out and puddling up, right? So the bigger shapes are the better option for this particular project. It's not usually a problem. I mean, the kids get it. They know they can do the detailed things another time, or they can let it dry and then they can add details with their pen or with, you know, whatever other materials they maybe want to add later on after everything is dry. So this is one of those projects where, again, if I'm doing a camp or I'm teaching a group, this is great for all age groups. I would just offer, again, for younger kids, especially maybe just a really basic design, something that they're not going to be intimidated by, and especially just to demonstrate, right? Like I would say, okay, this is what my flower looks like. Your flower does not have to look like my flower. It can be a completely different flower. You can do a house, you can do a bird, you can do a stick person, whatever you want to do. The idea is to learn how to use the materials, not to make it look exactly like mine, right? And then we'll just do some blades of grass. And this is one of those projects that's great if you have a group, an all-day group or a week-long group. This can be the beginning of the project, and then you can set it aside, and then you can go off for a snack break, or if you have younger kids, you can read them a story. Maybe if your theme is gardening and flowers, you read them, you know, a story about flowers or a garden or, you know, whatever's going on. Or you have a little bit of a play break while you gather all of the things up and set them aside to dry somewhere. So depending on the environment, the glue is going to take a while to dry. This is one of those things that I might even plan for one morning and then come back to the next day. Or if you're planning on doing this in the same day, this would be the first project that you do to give the glue a couple of hours at least to set and dry. Now, I live in the South, so it gets very humid here in the summertime when all the camps and things are happening. So it might take a little longer. So make sure you keep it in a place where it's not going to be disturbed by anyone and let it dry. And then we will come back and fill in the watercolor. Our other little flower is dry. You see where all the glue is dry. And this is what I meant when I said, you know, if you use lighter pencil marks, it's going to show up a little bit, but this is definitely way much starker in contrast. So, and that can be okay too. But you can see where the glue has flattened out and where in places it definitely spread out some more. So these are just things to be aware of, that as it sits and dries, it's going to continue to sort of spread out across the paper. So that's why larger shapes, more abstract shapes would be the focus. I would not focus on trying to get very specific lines because the glue is kind of one of those materials. It's going to kind of do what it wants to do. So let's paint this little flower in, and then we'll add some little details to finish it up. So again, the kids can play and be messy with this. Don't worry too much about getting it off of the glue parts because that's going to resist against it and it will bead away from it eventually. It can be cleaned up a little bit later if you really want to, but I would let it dry first because I tried to do that and it made a big smudge. But yeah, just kind of play with the colors and have fun with it and let the glue be part of the texture for this. And again, I would encourage wild tie-dye backgrounds and just fun things. So on the left side with the glue, I'm going to use the Faber-Castells, and I'm going to use the Stabilo colorful markers on the other side and just show you guys the difference in what that looks like so you can give that option to your kids. So once the paint is dried, we'll start on this one since it is dry. I would encourage maybe adding more details. Now, if you have kids who are like, this is beautiful, I love it, I'm done, and this was fun, and this is great, then that's totally fine. If you're looking to kind of stretch a project out a little bit, you can always get in there with some markers because the watercolor is very friendly and forgiving to allowing you to kind of draw over it. Now, water-based markers I don't think are going to work as well, so you definitely want to use some kind of like, you know, Crayola markers. You could try them. They should probably work just fine, but for little outlines like this, If you can find some sort of fine lined markers or pens, I think that would work a little bit better. It just gives them a little added refinement to their piece, and it just kind of makes all those little colors and things pop, so they can focus on outlining around where the oil pastel is, right? And you'll see when it hits the oil pastel, it's going to pick up on the marker a little bit. So this is where just keeping some scrap paper handy or some paper towels to scratch that oil pastel off again is helpful. And just, yeah, kind of go in there. You could even go in there with some stamping things if you have that. Or let me think, what else could we use? Some crayons over top to add some details and colors. Also a cool idea. But this is especially for the older kids. This is where they start looking at a little more detail and how they can layer their projects. Because so often, you know, they're given a project and you say, okay, this is the project, this is how we do this, and we're going to be happy about it. And that's it. There she is, right? You're gonna do your project, you're using paint, you're using color pencil, or you're using oil pastel, right? But this way they can really start to sort of play around and realize that they can layer materials and start learning about what materials work well together, what maybe won't work, what's going to create different effects, just like the resist. And that can open up a whole new world of creativity for them. So I'm just going to speed through this part to show you guys how I'm adding some extra details, some ideas, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side with the black pen. Another option is to outline everything with one of the black pens. Just a fine line pen will do just great. The Sharpies are fine. You don't have to go out and buy, you know, Faber-Castell pens or microns. Just a fine tip Sharpie works great. That's what we used a lot. And the kids get very excited when they get to use a Sharpie. So just kind of gives a different effect than going in with color. And so let me show you. I think we'll use the F. Just a nice round tip. So I think everything's dry. So with this, it's actually kind of fun. It's a totally different flow because you can get that pen right up next to that dried glue and just sort of breeze along the edges of it, right? So and they can outline all of their glue bits and really see. I think that part's still a little wet. Getting impatient, Sandra. Don't be impatient. But anyway, they can really get in there and just glide along the glue and have fun with that aspect of it. Just kind of cruising along like they're tracing their glue outlines, which creates a really cool effect too. So I'm going to let that dry just a little bit more so I don't ruin my fancy pen and finish it up. So now that my paper is actually dry, you can see where I'm just going along the edges of that glue with the pen, and it just rolls on the edges of the glue, and it's just a fun meditative little project. Just going around all of the glue bits. You can opt to leave, you know, some of the bits untraced, and that's what I'm doing at the bottom with the grass. So I'm not filling in all the bottom because I just like how it looks better with the grass. So something to keep in mind. So there is our resist painting in 2 ways. I do have a couple more projects that I'm going to share with you guys. One dealing with watercolor and how to get some really, or how to teach kids to get some really cool textures out of watercolor, which is another one of those tactile projects that are fun because you get your hands and everything, and it's something a little different to do with the materials. And then also I'm going to do another video using black glue to show you how to get like a really pretty sort of stained glass effect with this, basically the same kind of technique. So keep posted for those, keep a lookout for those. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. We do lots of fun artsy craftsy things here at Boho Jewel. And I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know if you do this with your kiddos at home or if you're doing this for a camp, etc., etc. And I will see you guys soon. Take care. Go be crafty and creative.